Thank you so much for joining us. This is our first interview for the Safer, Cleaner Planet series. I'd just like to first tell our listeners who we have today: the President and CEO of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. She is also the chairperson of the International Atomic Energy Agency's Commission on Safety Standards and the co-chair of the International Gender Champions Impact Group on Gender Equality in Nuclear Regulatory Agencies. So just to start with, you often speak about the importance of domestic and international collaboration when talking about SMRs. Could you kindly explain about collaboration and how important it is to you, not only from a regulator's point of view, but to the wider nuclear sector?
Thank you, Laetitia, first of all, for inviting me to this podcast. And then to this question, as you have mentioned, I have been a very, very strong advocate for greater international collaboration, particularly when it comes to advanced technologies that are being contemplated for deployment around the world. And I'll start off with why for Canada, or for the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, this is so important, and then try to see how we extrapolate that for the global community. As we look at these advanced technologies for deployment, they are all technologies that we are unfamiliar with. In Canada, our existing nuclear fleet is made up of CANDU reactors, and SMRs that are being considered for deployment in Canada are not CANDU. And so when we became aware of that, we recognized at the CNSC that in order for us to meet our goals of being in a state of readiness to meet the kind of timelines that are required to meet the climate change targets that Canada has set to meet the net zero goals of 2050, we need to do things in a different way, more expeditiously, more effectively, and certainly more efficiently. And part of that means collaborating with other regulators, those that may be familiar with some of these technologies, how we could pull our resources together, our learnings together, how we can avoid duplication of efforts, and how we can launch joint research projects, share expertise, have staff exchanges, etc. And so it was with that objective in mind, how can we become more efficient, more effective, in a better state of readiness for what we know is coming our ways, that international collaboration became part of our strategy. So that's on the collaboration side. Along with that is harmonization of regulatory requirements, harmonization of regulatory approaches, harmonization of standards, because I firmly believe, and it's a belief shared by many, that in order for us to meet our ambitious goals for climate change, for what SMRs, advanced technologies, can deliver, we need standard designs. We need a design that can get replicated, as opposed to what we've done historically. Each project is a bespoke project, customized for a site, for a country, and that simply will not allow us to meet our needs. And so what we need are standard designs. So it's almost a cookie cutter approach that can be manufactured and deployed globally. And this is not new for the nuclear sector. We do that with our transportation flasks, where they are standard. They get licensed in one country, adopted in another country, and can move between boundaries. It's what we see with commercial aircraft, where these are standard designs. So the harmonization is also an extremely important part. We have not done that with nuclear power plants in the past, but it's clearly one that's getting greater acceptance with time, and one that I strongly believe is a prerequisite for nuclear to play the role it's expected to play in the future.
Can you tell us about the difference between your regulatory work with large nuclear plants and that with small modular reactors? Just if the listeners are not familiar with small modular reactors, can you give an idea of the kind of work that you get engaged with?
So currently in Canada, we have 19 large nuclear reactors operating. And the last one that was built was over 30 years ago. And many of our reactors in our existing nuclear fleet have gone through what we call life extension, where their original life may have been 25 years, or may have been a bit slightly longer than that, where they're getting refurbished, where they're having their major components replaced to allow them to operate for another 30 plus years. And so many of our existing fleet are undergoing that refurbishment to extend their lives by, as I said, another 30 years or so. And so we're very familiar with our large nuclear reactors. Our regulatory framework, our expertise is based on large reactors, and they all happen to be CANDU reactors. What is now being contemplated also are small modular reactors. These are the ones under 300 megawatts, and they're different streams that are being considered. There are those being considered for grid, for electricity, to be connected to our transmission lines. Then there are those that are being considered for remote communities, so the smaller micro reactors, maybe a couple of megawatts, and those that are used could be used for industrial applications, whether it's in mining, for instance. And so there are different streams of SMRs that are being contemplated, and in Canada, what the approach is very much a pan-Canadian approach. Our government, working with different stakeholders, with our provinces, with our Indigenous communities, have developed, and the regulator, have so collectively, there is an SMR action plan that has been developed. There's an SMR leadership table. So we all meet around the table to talk about how, in an integrated, coordinated way, these SMRs can get deployed across Canada. And so from a regulator's perspective, where our experience has very much been focused on large CANDU reactors, how do we get ready for these small modular reactors? We've had to do a number of things in order to be prepared for that. And the mantra in my organization is to be in a state of readiness, that the regulator should not be an unnecessary impediment when it comes to the deployment of these advanced technologies. And so we have had a look at our regulatory framework, where our requirements have been tailored to these large reactors. How do they lend themselves to these newer advanced technologies? And maybe an analogy that I often use is, if you think of the large mainframe computers and having requirements for those, and now we've got tablets and laptops and iPads, etc., which have greater functionality, more features. How do we make sure, and that's the comparison between large reactors and SMRs, how do we make sure that our requirements are appropriate for these new technologies? They have different risks, so the requirements need to be commensurate with the risks, etc. So, and then how do we build our capacity, our learnings, our knowledge base, the research, etc. Is another part of how do we get ready for the new technology that is coming in front of us. And one of the things that we do in Canada, different countries have different processes, but we have a pre-licensing process that we call a vendor design review process, where a proponent can enter into this process. It allows them to get familiar with the Canadian regulatory system. These are proponents who have not worked in our system before. So it allows them, it's a three-phase process, to become familiar with our process, to see how their technology could meet our requirements, see if there are any showstoppers there. And it also allows my staff to become familiar with the technology, so that when the official licensing process begins, we will up on our learning curve. So we've had a number of technologies that have participated, are participating in our vendor design review process. So those are just some of the examples, Laetitia.
And so how does the harmonization and standardization of your approach, how do you think that's key to the safe and effective deployment of SMRs? Because safety is obviously the main thing that's in people's the forefront of their minds. How do you address that, and what do you find are the challenges to progressing international harmonization and standardization?
Our first collaboration agreement that we put in place was with the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission. We've always worked very closely with them, but recognized that we need to take it to a different level. And so in 2019, me and my counterpart at the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Chairman Christine Svinicki, signed a memorandum of understanding where we agreed that we would work together in assessing, in reviewing these advanced technologies. And so the specific example, just to show you how that collaboration is working and how it would lead to better safety outcomes, is in Canada, which, by the way, is the first G7 country that is getting ready to deploy a grid-scale SMR on a commercial basis at our Darlington site. And it happens to be GE Hitachi's BWRX 300, a 300-megawatt reactor. And so GE Hitachi has been going through our vendor design review process, our pre-licensing process. They've just completed the first 2 phases. A precursor of this particular design, the enhanced boiling water reactor, this BWR, had been certified by the US NRC. So this is an advancement of that particular one. So the US NRC has a wealth of knowledge around that particular design. We bring a lot to the table because of our pre-licensing process for this particular design. And now we're joining forces together. This particular technology is also going to be deployed by the Tennessee Valley Authority at one of their sites. And so the 2 utilities, the proponent, GE Hitachi, and along with the support of the 2 regulators, have said what we are striving for is a standard design. And the only differences would be if there are site-specific needs, could be seismic issues or flooding issues, etc., that may drive some modifications to the design, but otherwise it is going to be a standard design. And so what that allows us is to work jointly for the 2 regulators to work jointly on reviewing the design, different aspects of the design. And by bringing greater perspectives, our experience, our know-how, it just allows for richer dialogue, richer discussions, and a better safety outcome because you brought in different perspectives. So, and that model is working extremely well. As I said, we signed that agreement in 2019, and we've received our construction license application in October of last year from Ontario Power Generation. And so we're working very closely with the US NRC, and that model's worked well. And we picked the US NRC because we consider each other like-minded regulators. And we've since expanded it. Now we've got the UK's Office of Nuclear Regulator that we have also signed a memorandum of understanding. And if they decide to select the same technology, then they too will be at the table. And last month, I signed an MOU with the Polish regulator because they too have made a decision to deploy the GE Hitachi design. Now, Poland is slightly different because they're very new in the nuclear power business. And so they're building up their capability, their infrastructure. So we're trying to see how this collaboration model can work with a newcomer nuclear country by providing support, by making sure that they're not recreating things. And so they're going to be seconding staff to work with us, to learn from us, and So it's a model that we're hoping can get replicated and built with other regulators, but really those that have picked the same technology and have a commitment to a standard design.
Can I ask you about the utility in the case of the Darlington new nuclear project? What is the role of the utility in that case? How has everybody worked so well together to get your completion date? Is that correct that it will be as early as 2029?
2028 is the target date for in-service. Yes. And so Ontario Power Generation is the utility. They have got 4 large nuclear reactors on site. And in the early part of the century, they were considering building more large reactors. And so they had got an environmental assessment done for that site to build additional reactors of up to 4,800 megawatts. So with OPG, they had already gone through that environmental assessment process and had already got a site preparation license from the CNSC to build additional nuclear reactors. Now they have decided to go with SMRs, and part of the requirement was, does the SMR fit in this envelope that they had done their environmental assessment, but they had looked at potentially different technologies for which they could deploy. And so they had a bit of a head start because they had done this first part of an environmental assessment and site preparation license. And then, as I mentioned, in October, they submitted the construction license application. And we're hoping that if all goes well, if the application is solid, if our commission hearings and with the interventions goes per schedule, that they could get a construction license in 2 years' time, and then they'd move into the operation license phase after that. What has also happened is, so with TVA, the other utility, OPG, GE, Hitachi, and the USNRC Chairman Hansen and I, we've kind of set up an oversight group where the 5 of us meet on a regular basis to get updates from our staff on how the project is coming along, really to make sure that if they are making any changes to the design, that they're justified. And so it's just that additional level of oversight. Yeah,
that's very helpful. So, and when we talk, going back to emerging nuclear countries, what do you think it is about SMRs that makes them sort of a less intimidating nuclear option? And how do these countries get involved in this work that you're doing internationally with all these new approaches that you seem to be pioneering at CNSC, Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission?
And you're right. I mean, there's just so much interest in SMRs around the world, both with those that are existing nuclear countries, but more definitely with others, both for, with this climate change or energy security or energy poverty issues that are being addressed. And what makes SMRs attractive is, one is their size, and the fact that they come, as I mentioned, in different, they can be used for many different applications. So they've got a lot of flexibility, a lot of variability that they offer. And because of their size, they're just a lot more affordable than these large reactors. And so I think it's a combination of those. They have a lot of advanced features that are supposedly, which has to be proven, easier to operate, certainly a lot safer because they've got these built-in passive systems where you don't need human intervention to shut down the reactor, which is safely shut down, for instance. So it's got a whole lot of advanced features that make it a lot more attractive. And again, as I said, instead of multi-billion dollars, you've got a project that is more affordable. And because these are seen, so not only are they small, they're modular, so they can get built anywhere and then shipped across. So you really don't need to have that kind of infrastructure locally. So advice that I would give to emerging countries, one is the international community, and certainly with agencies like the International Atomic Energy Agency, have extensive programs and initiatives to provide support to new nuclear countries. It's almost a playbook on how do you start, and what's the infrastructure you need, and what's, what are the agencies and the governance that you need, and what's the capability, etc. So it's not only a playbook, but a lot of support, whether it's expertise, etc., or even mentoring and so on, to help do so. And there are a lot of fora that exist where people come and share best practices, provide guidance, so I think what's really quite unique about the nuclear sector is it is very much a global community, and we all have a vested interest that the deployment of nuclear reactors in the world are done safely. The old adage, and a nuclear accident anywhere is a nuclear accident everywhere. So we all have an obligation to make sure that these countries who are embarking on a nuclear power program can do that safely, primarily, and then of course that it meets their economic and other considerations. So a lot of support. As I mentioned, Poland is kind of the guinea pig for us on how our model can be applied to an emerging country. It's got a long, these are sophisticated technologies, so it's got a fairly long runway that's required in making sure that certainly the members of the public feel comfortable with this new technology, that you've got the social license that goes with it, that it is a full life cycle that you have to think about right now. You can't just say, oh, well, I'll build it and then I'll worry about the operation, then I'll worry about commissioning and waste. I mean, you've got to do this right now. So it does require that full life cycle planning, and a really good example of a country that embarked on a nuclear power program and that has done it so well is the United Arab Emirates. That, as you know, they just got their third reactor online very recently, last week. Kind of the only project outside, that in the Western world, or that has been delivered on time and on schedule, is performing really well.
Yeah.
And so if you look at the elements of what has made that very successful, there's so much we can all learn from and replicate as these other countries look at introducing nuclear power.
So what do you think is unique about the UAE in that sense? How have they got? Have you collaborated directly with them? What have they done differently, which has really enabled them to keep on track?
I mean, they've done a whole lot of things differently, and I'll highlight a few that I find particularly admirable. So one is they picked a proven technology. It's a Korean technology, the APR 1400. And they adopted it and brought it into the UAE as is, right? The only changes they made was, we've got to worry about sand, so we better have some filtration before, and our water will be at a higher temperature, so we may need more coolant before we can cool it before we release it to the environment. But the bulk, the majority of the plant is exactly as has been deployed in Korea. So that allows much greater collaboration between the designers, the supply chain, the operators, certainly the regulators as well. I think that's probably the single most one. The second thing that UAE did is they brought the best and the brightest from around the world to design and develop and implement their nuclear program. And they've just done it so thoughtfully, right from, the policy direction all the way, and really striving for excellence in every single way, and always reaching out to learn from others, to share their best practices. And I've got to take this opportunity. The other thing they have done really well is bring in gender diversity into the nuclear program. and so evident. I actually visited the Baraka nuclear power plant. I've done it before, but I was there again last week. And their commitment to gender balance in their nuclear program is highly evident, and the lengths they have gone to make sure that they attract, retain, and promote women is truly admirable. It frankly puts the rest of us to shame.
Yes, and so just quickly on that point, women and STEM, so that's science, technology, engineering, and math. How has your approach to gender equality in nuclear perhaps differed or is echoing what's happening in the UAE, for example? And do you see it in other European countries?
So it's very interesting, given that earlier this week we had International Women's Day, and the Organization of Economic Cooperation Development's Nuclear Energy Agency released a report on gender balance in the nuclear sector. And it's the first comprehensive study done where like over 8,000 women around the world in like 36 countries were surveyed to get their insights on what it's like to work in the nuclear sector, as well as collecting statistics from different organizations. And overall, the picture looks pathetic. Less than a quarter of the workforce in nuclear is women. And if you look at the STEM side of it, or the leadership side, it's a whole lot less. And what's particularly disappointing is that even though a lot of effort seems to have been expended, the needle has hardly moved in the representation side of things. And I've been a lifelong advocate of greater gender equity and greater gender balance and greater diversity overall. And so I'll share with you a few things that I have done and a few things that I'm really pushing for. In my own organization at the CNSC, we actually have gender parity. People love our mandate, love the opportunities, love the work. And so women are represented extremely well at all levels in my organization. I, along with another colleague, initiated what's called Driving the Advancement of Women in Nuclear. And so that is a Canadian initiative where we have been advocates of greater gender equality in the nuclear sector in Canada. And I'm really happy to say that in the last 3 years, we are seeing remarkable progress, particularly as a result of commitment by leadership to bring about change. And as you mentioned in the introduction, I co-chair the impact group at the international level. And there is a fair bit of work. So the group at the international level, it's now regulators. We've got almost 40 regulators now that have joined and made a commitment to improve representation, improve the working conditions for women, and we share best practices with each other. UAE is a big leader in that forum, and we certainly have a lot to learn, particularly on how they're building their pipeline and the work that's happening at the university level to make sure that as we look ahead, we're going to have that, we do have that leaky pipe syndrome, that we do have a strong pipeline. And if I look at Canadian universities, and the European ones aren't different. I mean, there's some countries, certainly the Scandinavian countries, where representation is much better. But if you just averaged out, the picture looks pretty much the same everywhere. Is that even at universities, if you look in the engineering and the science side, particularly the applied science, the representation of women even there is not hopeful, which means that if we expected 5 years, naturally things will get better. Not going to happen. So, yeah.
And do you think women are being more attracted into the small modular reactor space, or rather than the large nuclear? Is that drawing a new generation? And also, just to ask also about the public, what else are you doing at CNSC to reach out to the public over safety issues, community issues, that type of thing?
So when it comes to women, so a couple of interesting insights. If you look at public polling results and look at support for nuclear or concerns about nuclear, women generally tend to be more concerned, less supportive for nuclear men, and different age groups as well. And that's not just for nuclear. I mean, I've actually been watching this very closely with other technologies, vaccines also. You know, the women just tend to be a bit more skeptical about these things. But your question around, are they more attracted to SMRs than to large reactors? Well, we haven't built any large reactors, as I said, in over 30 years, though we have been refurbishing them and extending their lives, which for Canada has been extremely helpful, because it has meant that we have a strong supply chain. We've got strong project management skills. Our refurbishment projects have been extremely successful, not only as far as cost and schedule that people report about, but how they have really enhanced the operations. They've been done safely, and so it's built a supply chain. Certainly for my staff, it has enhanced our oversight of construction projects, because these refurbishment projects are really large construction projects. They're large infrastructure projects. And new technologies have been developed. So it has really brought these nuclear plants to modern age standards from where they were before. And so when I look at are women more attracted to small or large, I find that, and particularly the younger folks, where climate change is the primary driver for what attracts them. I want to make this world a better place for me, future generations, and I truly believe that nuclear can play a role in that. I don't think there's much of a distinction. SMRs are a bit sexy because they're small, they're new. As someone said, you can actually cuddle them, but not quite that. But you know, they're new technologies, seem like kind of a new toy. But
there's no specific. Okay, and so what about building trust? So this you've mentioned. Right. You have wonderful phrases in your speeches, like it is our duty to lift others and to build trust, and it's very refreshing to hear that from somebody in the nuclear sector. Not that I'm saying that the nuclear sector doesn't champion these things, but it's just that you're particularly sensitive around how the public feels, and you're very inclusive. So can you talk to me about equity and inclusion as sort of core principles within which you personally lead this industry?
Thank you for that, Laetitia, because it is such an essential part of how we define success, that we cannot be a successful, competent regulator if we're not a trusted regulator. And a trusted regulator is one that members of the public, our licensees, our different stakeholders, our Indigenous communities and nations recognize as a regulator that is strong, that is independent, that's competent, that can be trusted, that we can have confidence in. And what does that trusted and confidence mean? And for us, and particularly a priority that we have set for my organization, is around transparency and inclusion, and along with all the others about competency, etc. But the transparency and inclusion in our processes, in our thinking, has been a fundamental part of what we are trying to do within the organization. So at the CNSC, I actually wear two hats. I'm the chief executive officer, so I manage this organization of 900 people, but I'm also the president because we have a commission of 7 commission members that include me, and it's the commission that makes the licensing decisions. And our commission proceedings are held in the public. We provide participant funding for people to participate in our proceedings where they get an opportunity to intervene. Sometimes they hire experts to intervene on their behalf. When we approve regulatory documents or our regulatory requirements, we go out for consultation. We actually, again, give people funding to participate in those processes, because it is so important to hear those different voices and perspectives to make sure that what we are coming up with are the best decisions. And what we have found, and as many other countries have found, is that it's fine to go through the regulatory process, which is based very much on science and evidence, but you also need the social license. So it's not just the regulatory license that's needed. You need that social license in order to really get these projects off the ground. And so it's really from the school of hard knocks that we have found out that, you've got the regulatory approval and the project's not going to proceed because the local community is not supportive of that. So one of the things we do as a regulator, but we certainly require the licensees, the proponents to do, is early engagement with the communities that are being considered so that they understand the community's concerns, needs, and work together on those. We do the same. We're out in the communities to let them know what the regulator is about, how we ensure safety and protection of the environment, and how they can be heard and how they can influence the work that we do. So, it's frankly become the normal part of doing business here.
Are you the first to actually provide funding for stakeholders at a social level?
Yes, as far as I know, because and the reason why I say that is within the nuclear community, where we do get peer reviews and we get assessments, it's always seen as a best practice for others to emulate, because it's recognized that we're the ones that provide this participant funding.
That's excellent.
Build capacity.
Coming on to one of the points that has obviously been very controversial over time is nuclear waste. Could you just talk about it from a regulatory point of view to listeners who are skeptical about nuclear waste, as to how you deal with those uncertainties, and especially around use and disposal? How does the CNSC as a regulator engage with the public on this and keep them up to date and informed on the issue of radioactive waste, where there seems to be a lot of misconception potentially? What needs to be done? What pathways?
So we have currently two major initiatives, projects on waste in Canada. We have for used fuel, a deep geological repository that is being contemplated, and that has been in the works for over a couple of decades. And at the current state, they have shortlisted 2 sites that are still being assessed. And the organization that's leading this waste project is the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. And they have made it very clear that whichever site gets picked will be one that has a willing host community, a host community that's well informed and that is willing to accept this. And that's one project. The other one that we have is for low-level waste, which is the bulk of, from a volume perspective, makes up like 90% of the waste that is generated. And there is a site it's a near surface disposal facility that's being, and that's going through public hearings right now. So waste is kind of front and center in the public's eye, not only because waste has always been an area of concern, but we do have these 2 major projects underway with a lot of public consultation. We have a national policy on radioactive waste management that is on the throes of getting finalized and issued, and that has had a lot of public consultation as it goes through the process of getting finalized. So waste is right up there. We've had parliamentary committees recently looking at how low and intermediate level waste is managed, and it frankly came up with a very good report card that it is managed effectively, consistent with international standards and best practices. So from a regulatory perspective, our requirements are very clear. Our oversight is very strong. Waste has been well managed. We've never had any incidents. There is excellent public consultation and engagement. The commitment made that it would be an informed community that consents to it for the used fuel repository. And as you know, when we look at Finland, we look at Sweden, those are countries that are well ahead in their long-term solution for used fuel. So from a technical perspective, it's proven.
Yes.
That's not the issue. The issue is very much around public concerns, around perception, and how do we make sure that we understand that and that we address those.
And there is very high levels of monitoring with this waste as well. I think people have made this assumption that somehow it gets on a ship and is sort of, sent around the world. Can you just quickly talk to the accuracy of the monitoring in the nuclear industry for waste? And maybe you just talk about Canada.
Well, so waste, so each country that has a nuclear program actually signs a convention around waste. This is a joint convention. And on a regular basis, every 3 years, there's a report that gets submitted, and it's very detailed. It's frankly the only sector that knows to the 0.00 whatever decimal place of how much waste volume there is of radioactive waste and where it is. It's extremely well monitored and accounted for. And not only is it monitored, accounted for, it's publicly reported, it gets reviewed, it gets audited, it gets assessed on a regular basis. But we also make sure that the funding is set aside to manage this waste for its entire life cycle. So it's not abandoned for future generations to worry about. And the licensee, as part of our regulation, is required to set up a separate fund for the management of this waste through eternity, kind of thing.
Can you give a sense of scale? Because I think people think it's sort of an infinite amount of waste. What sort of scale are you talking with a large nuclear plant? And also, how would that change with a small modular reactor?
So we have, as I mentioned, 19 reactors operating right now. We've had a few that have shut down. And the total volume of the high-level waste, which is the one that there's the greatest amount of concern with, and this is very much a Canadian analogy, but it's about 8 hockey rink size. So think about this, these are plants that have operated for 50 years now, and that's the amount of waste that has been generated. 8 hockey rinks. It's and this waste is stored at our existing nuclear facilities, very safely stored, very closely monitored, as I said, and audited. So from a volume perspective, very safe. And you've probably seen pictures of people who go visit them in these huge flasks, these dry storage containers that they're in, and you can go and again hug those because they're very safe. And solid. So frankly, waste management is a good news story from a safety perspective, from managing things responsibly for the full life cycle.
And so just coming to the end nearly, on the investment side, obviously there's the new nuclear reactors are full of promise. There are hesitancies, however, and just to the point of the concerns of cost overruns and delays, from your perspective, what can regulators do to address these concerns, do you think? Because I think being honest, here in the UK, it might, I think people worry that there will be delays and therefore, they can't unlock the revenue streams on a project finance perspective. What's being done to sort of reassure, the capital, the investment side, because that's really a key to unlocking the promise of it all?
So I will give you the regulator's perspective, because the economic side is not one that really fits in my mandate or I get particularly concerned about. But certainly the impact the regulator can have on the costs and the financing really comes around us being able to provide certainty and predictability. Certainty around our requirements upfront, as opposed to, I have been in this sector for a long, long time. And the last nuclear plant that was built was the Darlington plant. And I was actually involved in the construction of that plant. And that plant was being built while it was being designed. Like the final design was not. And that's probably one of the biggest problems that nuclear power plants or any major infrastructure project has had, that the design's not complete and you've started construction. And so as the design started evolving and changing, the regulator would say, but you're not meeting our requirements. Now you've come up with something different and we need something different. So, and so that always led to delays and costs. And so what we have made sure is that we have been upfront on what our regulatory requirements are. Our pre-licensing process helps with bringing greater understanding of those requirements. And there's predictability that if you do these things, the likelihood of you getting a license is high. And one of the things we did with the refurbishment projects that has worked really well is we've established a protocol between us and our licensees on our mutual expectations and how we would work together so that there are no surprises. And a true testimony of how well that worked was one of the units at Darlington was getting refurbished and it was ready to come online when the pandemic hit. And so now we're all working from home with limited resources to even reach out to each other. And we were able to give our regulatory approvals to lift what we call hold points so they could move to the next stage of starting up the units in a virtual world, in a new world. But it was because we were so clear with our requirements and those communication channels had been so well established that we didn't lose a beat in any of this. So when it comes to these new technologies, I think around being very clear around our expectations, around the predictability, around establishing those working relationships, I think all help in making sure that there are no surprises for either party. Our requirements of our proponents, our licensees, is if you submit a solid application with the information we have asked for, then we will very smoothly go through our review process. If there are gaps in the information, and remember, for some of these technologies, they're still just on paper. There's a lot of uncertainties. So that will lead to overruns and so on. But the technology that OPG has picked, the GE Hitachi one, is a very well-known technology. The fuel exists. And so for the first SMR to get deployed, certainly from a regulator's perspective, it's excellent news because there are less variations or uncertainties there.
So once that site has been completed, what do you anticipate to be the kind of knock-on effect globally? And just to the last point, why do you think over the last few years is nuclear becoming such a key part of the conversation around energy security and addressing climate change? That would be my last question to you.
So I think the knock-on effects have already started. OPG announced the GE Hitachi, and now you're seeing, Poland has announced that province of Saskatchewan is looking at it very closely. I suspect UK is, I've heard Sweden is. And so as I tell OPG and GE Hitachi, I think the whole world is watching us. This is the first SMR at a commercial grid scale that's going to get deployed. And if it is successful, then yes, there'll be a whole lot more folks that say, yes, this is actually delivering. If it isn't, I think it's really going to set back the whole promise that SMRs are expected to have. So I think there's a lot riding on the Darlington project getting delivered successfully.
Nuclear is obviously, from my perspective, does a lot to address climate change, and the safety issues have been widely considered to be the biggest barrier. So thank you so much for all the work that you do to address the safety and the public's concerns around nuclear. Rumina Velshi, it's been a tremendous privilege to have you on the first issue of the Safer, Cleaner Planet series. So thank you so much for your time, and we hope to meet you in London or in the UK at some point in the future. So have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you, Laetitia. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.